comes up like this. Okay? And when you mix the antibodies with the red blood cells that contain the specific antigen to which the antibody reacts, we can have agglutination of the red blood cells. They're going to be cross-linked. Okay? So if you have type A antigens here in this well on the surface of red blood cells, and you mix it with anti-A antibodies, then what you can see is these red blood cells are going to clump. They're going to aggregate. And that'll be obvious both grossly and when you look at the serum under the microscope. On the other hand, if in the other well there's no clumping or aggregation, then we know that there are no B antigens present in this second well. So if you see clumping in the first well but not in the second, what type of blood does the patient have?
B.
What is it?
B.
B? If you see clumping in the first well, but none in the second, what type of blood does the patient have? A. In other words, the serum's reacting, the anti-A is reacting with A antigen. In the second well, if there's no B antigen with which to react, then the patient doesn't have B antigens in their blood. They would only have A. What type of blood would a patient have if you saw agglutination in both wells? AB. What type of blood would they have if you saw no agglutination? Oh, that's correct. Okay? So, sometimes these antigens, the type A antigen, B, or AB, are called agglutinogens. And the antibodies are called agglutinins. So a person that has agglutinogen A would have agglutinin B. In other words, anti-B antibodies. But again, this is simply what we discussed. A person with type A is going to have anti-B agglutinins. A person with type B blood is going to have anti-A agglutinins. A person who has both antigens, AB blood, is going to have either. Type O blood, both. Now, if a person has type O blood, okay, the blood type is what is expressed on the surface of the red blood cell. The genotype represents the genes present within the chromosomes. A person with type O blood is going to have the genotype OO, meaning both mom and dad contributed the O antigen. Okay? That doesn't code for either A or B.
So that means both of your parents have to have type O blood?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
but we'll come back to that.
All right.
A person who's got type A blood, that means that the A antigen is present on the surface of red blood cells. They can have one of two different genotypes. They can have AA, both parents contributing to the gene that produces the A antigen, or they can have AO. The O gene doesn't produce any antigen, but the A gene, contributed by the other parent, is producing that A antigen on the surface. Same thing is true for the person with type B blood. They can have one of two different genotypes, either BB, in which both parents contribute the B gene, or that person can have BO, in which one parent contributes the B gene, the other O. And finally, if you have the AB blood type, the only genotype that's possible is AB. One parent contributes to A, the other parent contributes to B. Does that make sense? We talked about the fact that when you do blood typing, you look for coagulation or clotting. Okay? And it'll be fairly obvious when you look at the well. But to double check, if you're a lab tech, you're going to take some of that serum that's clotted and look at it under the microscope. This is non-agglutination. This is blood that's not clotting when you react with antibodies. This is coagulation. This is what it looks like under the microscope if in fact the antibodies are reacting with the antigens on the surface of the red blood cells. So it's a double check. You look grossly and then you perform a visual test using the microscope. This is what the clotting looks like. Again, this person would have type AB because you see clumping or coagulation in both wells. This person would have type B. There's only clumping in one of the two wells. This would be type A, and this would be type O. But there's no clumping or coagulation in either well in reaction with the serum. Reaction with serum. Everybody with me? We're all good? This is just a summary of those things that we've talked about. Okay? This is blood type at the top. This is the type of agglutinogens or antigens on the surface of the red blood cells. If they have these antigens, then the next row represents the antibodies or agglutins. If they have type A, they're going to have agglutinin B or anti-B antibodies and so forth. Okay? Now, ideally, if somebody has type A blood, okay, and they need a transfusion, we want to transfuse with type A donor red blood cells. Okay? We want to provide an exact match if possible. Okay? But in an emergency, where we don't have time to perform what's called a cross match, what blood type can we use in an emergency for anybody? Type O, because type O doesn't have any antigens on its surface against which the patient's antibodies can react. So we consider type O the universal donor. Okay? Whereas type AB is considered the universal recipient. Why? Because patients with type AB blood don't have any antibodies against either A or B. So in an emergency, you can give them any type of red blood cell, and they're not going to react in an emergency. Yeah.
Like when they have, like there are people that have O positive and O negative. Does it matter if they have positive or negative?
Yeah, it does. That's a minor antigen. That it's called an RH antigen. The RH antigen is a minor antigen, and you can have a reaction. So if you have to give type O blood, you'd rather give O
Positive.
negative.
Oh, really?
Negative, because it doesn't have that RH antigen on the surface. So O negative would be the ideal type of blood to donate to that person. Because you're right, if someone's O positive, they're not going to have an ABO reaction, but they could still react against the RH antigen. Okay? But the RH antigen is a little bit different in this respect. If you have never been exposed to RH positive red blood cells, you're not born with anti-RH antibodies. So the first time you're exposed, you don't have a clinical reaction. It's only on subsequent exposures.
Okay.
So the RH antigen is different from the standpoint that people are not born with antibodies against RH if they're RH negative.
But they'll create them once
But if they're
they've been
exposed, they'll create them. Okay?
So as long as you don't have more than one blood transfusion, you're good.
Right. Well, I'll give an example here. Okay. We're drawing here. Okay. So we have a pregnant mom. Okay? And let's say mom is Rh negative, okay? And let's say Puddin here is Rh positive, okay? Now, if this is the first child, and the mother's never been exposed to Rh positive red blood cells before, there's not going to be a problem with Puddin. Puddin can be delivered and have no problems. But one of the concerns in this situation is near the time of delivery, there can be some mixing of maternal and fetal blood.
Mhm.
Now, in certain pathologic conditions, during the course of pregnancy, there can also be some mixing. For instance, a threatened abortion or miscarriage. Sometimes there can be some mixing of the blood. But let's just say that this is normal delivery, and at the time the placenta begins to separate, there's some mixing of fetal and maternal red blood cells. When the mother is exposed to those Rh positive cells, she then produces anti-Rh antibodies. Okay? Are those antibodies going to attack Puddin?
No.
No, Puddin's already out
It's gonna take mom.
and a happy child. Okay? But now, let's suppose the mother gets pregnant again,
Mhm.
and this second child is Rh positive.
Then there's an
Now, the maternal red blood cells are not going to cross the placenta, but those antibodies can. And so these antibodies can cross the placenta and attack those Rh positive fetal red blood cells and create a hemolytic anemia. This condition is called erythroblastosis totalis.
And so the baby would have that?
Well, these antibodies would attack, right, the baby would have this condition, that the maternal antibodies would attack the fetal red blood cells. Okay? And sometimes it can result in fetal death. So, how do we prevent this?
The mom has to take something.
Yes, what is it called?
I don't remember.
Rogam. It's a medication called Rogam. Okay. And you ever watch Star Trek?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you have the starship, got car, yeah, okay. And then all of a sudden, they see a Romulan warship coming along the same path that they're in. So then they activate a cloaking device so that the Romulan warship can't see them. It hides them. That's what Rogam is. It's a cloaking device. You inject the mother both at a certain point during pregnancy, then right before delivery with Rogam. And what Rogam will do is it will cloak the fetal red blood cells if they enter into the maternal circulation, so that the mother's immune system doesn't see them. So it will coat those red blood cells so that the immune system of the mother doesn't react to them.
So how do they find out what the baby's blood type is when they're still in utero?
Well, you can do a couple of things. You can get, you can do an amniocentesis.
Well, yeah, but aside from that.
It's invasive. Whatever
Okay.
you do, it's an invasive
Because
method.
I remember I have O positive and my daughter turned out to have O positive, but I guess maybe
Then
they
if
didn't
you're O
find
positive,
out.
you don't have to worry about it.
Oh, it's only if it's the mother's
only if
O
you're
negative.
Rh negative. And what happens is if you're Rh negative, they empirically give you Rogam. They're not going to test the baby.
Oh,
If
they
you're
just do
Rh
it
negative,
as
and each time you're pregnant, you're going to get Rogam.
they just do it prophylactically.
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct. Everybody follow all that? We'll get into a little bit more complicated stuff. Let's suppose this, okay? Let's say you're watching Jerry Springer show. Are you all familiar with that show?
Yeah.
Okay, I would not fess up to it. Your reaction should, what? What is that show? You never want to fess up to the fact that you're watching Jerry Springer. All right, but let's suppose they usually have some type of baby mama on there. Okay, and she's bringing a little child, and she's dragging in some guy who's kicking and screaming and saying, this guy is the baby daddy. And he's saying, no, no, she was sleeping around. It ain't me. Okay? That's what happens on these shows. Okay? And so back in the old days, they would do some blood typing, which would help sometimes to prove or disprove that this guy's the dad. Okay? So let's say you got the mom, and you got the potential baby daddy here. And then here, you got the baby, little pudding. Okay? And so, let's say Puddin has type B blood. The mom has type B. And let's say they were to do a phenotype on the dad, and he's got type A. Okay? Do these results exclude this fellow from being a dad?
Yeah.
No, they don't.
Oh, because he might have enough, like a carrier.
Well, the baby, we don't know what the genotype is unless they did genotype testing. But this baby could either have DB or BO. Now, if the child would have the BB genotype, then this in fact would exclude the dad, because he would have to contribute the B gene. Okay, the second B gene. The mom's contributing the first. Okay, but if the baby's got BO, the mom could contribute the B gene, and the dad could have the AO genotype, and that would be his contribution. Does that make sense? Let's suppose that mom is type A blood with the AO genotype.